great revelation.
Hey everyone, welcome to the live stream. It is February 13th, Friday. Happy Friday. Welcome to the podcast. Top stories today. CPI report, inflation down to 2.4%. Also, a recent poll by Axios is asking the question, do you think Joe Biden was a better president than Donald Trump? Obviously, Operation Mockingbird. And the Chicken Littles in the Democratic Party continue to talk about how terrible the country is when we're in a period of restoration, not decline, really. We got more news concerning AI as well. So let's read the news. We're going to start out with this Axios article. A year into Trump's term, voters say Biden was better. The article goes on to say, President Trump has become so politically toxic that voters now say Joe Biden, whose unpopularity forced him into early retirement, did a better job as president, according to 3 new polls. Well, I'm not really going to buy into any of these polls. I didn't even go into the article. It's ridiculous. Now, if you know anything about Axios, much like The Hill was co-opted later, started out as a legitimate news organization, but later on became co-opted by intelligence. Axios and sites like Politico were constructed specifically for the new age of media by intelligence. Now, I'm not saying they don't have some unwitting journalists working there. They might very well be, but you can't even take this seriously. It says right in the lead that Joe Biden, whose unpopularity forced him into early retirement. It's trying to say that Joe Biden, who still holds the record for receiving the most votes cast, but in the same vein, his unpopularity in his first term was so great that it forced him into early retirement. You can't reconcile those two things. So Axios is obviously putting something out there, particularly an article right before the ship of state is apparently sailing into better waters. Now we have some problems with Iran, but certainly President Trump is handling foreign policy way better than the Biden administration did. So let's move into some better news. Wall Street Journal, home sales in January posted biggest monthly decline in nearly 4 years. Freezing temperatures and high home prices snuffed out the sales momentum for the past previous months, according to the Wall Street Journal. The actual reality about this is home prices are getting cheaper and interest rates are coming down. And for most people that are buying on a mortgage, they realize that the mortgage rates are lacking. As I mentioned just the other day, that we had several interest rate cuts at the Fed, and that usually precipitates a rise in prices, expenses, etc., before a decline. And so people are waiting out the interest rate bump before the decline. So they try to make it sound like it was freezing temperatures. The high home prices are in reality, because this is weird, this article here was actually preempted by another article by the Wall Street Journal that says home prices are decreasing. I thought that was the article I had there. Moving on, though, to the New York Post, White House says it will save Americans $2,400 on car purchase. This is why. The reasoning why is that he removed the meddlesome regulation surrounding the fact that carbon dioxide and anything carbon related is considered a pollutant, and most particularly is a danger to every American. So every pollutant that is created, a carbon pollutant, is a danger to Americans. And so there was a wide regulatory scheme, really, that attached cost to anything that could create a carbon footprint, carbon pollution. And so the car makers say that this adds about $2,400 per car in the United States. Moving on to other good news. Story number 4, zero hedge, U.S. core CPI tumbles to slowest in 4 years. Real wage growth surges. And that is the part of the equation that we need to look at. Is you can't really beat higher prices except with wage growth. Once there's inflation, it's permanent. Once you devalue or undervalue or cause the dollar, the United States currency, to become less worth, to have less worth, then prices rise. That's how you see it. You don't actually see your physical dollar like get smaller or anything like that, or change in any normative way. You see prices go up. So the change is really happening in your wallet, not on the grocery store shelves. But that's the way people notice, and they go, oh, why are prices so high? It's because of the president. This has nothing to do with the president. It was the Biden administration borrowing more money than he needed, even was a demand, or even there was a demand for. So moving on, I want to just show you, despite the hot whisper numbers, headline consumer price inflation came in cooler than expected in January. From 2.7 down to 2.4, near the lowest in 4 years. And there's the graph there. This is the point that I'm trying to make, is that it's not so much panicking as much as it is chicken littles in the media, on the Democratic side, everywhere you go with leftist media. They're saying, oh, things are so horrible. Things are so horrible. Trump is horrible. Trump is making prices go up. Trump is the reason that you're having a hard time affording things. Affordability. Now they're backing away from that because Trump is addressing affordability. Like Trump addresses concerns, whether it's foreign diplomacy or it's domestically, he's addressing people's concerns. So now they moved away from affordability and they went full on ICE, and now they're trying to make ICE, it's sort of a whack-a-mole. They're putting up these reports and these crises that don't really have, there's nothing there. We're going to talk about immigration a little bit in a second, but we're going to start mostly with more of this chicken little coming from the Democratic Party, which filters on through the mainstream media, which is the New York Times. Democrats block funding bill as Homeland Security shutdown looms. Now, this is pretty terrible, and the reasoning being is that we need Homeland Security. I don't really like I didn't like the creation of Homeland Security after 9/11. It's more bloated bureaucracy, but the point is it's running the deportation efforts. And although ICE is funding for the next 6 years, we need to keep the pressure on, keep it going. And if they want to shut down the government because of this, let the Democrats do it. The blame of the last shutdown fell squarely on the Democrats, without a doubt. Thanks again for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. Moving on with the headlines here. Let's just go back to this New York Times article and explain a little bit what the Democrats are doing there on Capitol Hill. Funding standoff. Senate Democrats block a measure to fund the Department of Homeland Security as lawmakers remain locked in a standoff that would shut down the agency this weekend. The bill contained none of the restrictions on immigration enforcement that the Democrats have demanded to fund the department. The vote came after a heated. So if you remember, they had those 10 points that they insisted on. Some of them, the Department of Homeland Security already did, like body cameras. The vote came after a heated 4-hour Senate hearing with top immigration officials. You might have seen this hearing. I'm going to get to it in just a second, in which Todd Lyons, the acting director or the acting chief of ICE, acknowledged that 2 citizens killed by agents in Minnesota, Renee Good and Alex Pretty, did not appear to be domestic terrorists. And also, I haven't really addressed this. The Minnesota ICE drawdown. Tom Homan, the White House border czar, said that the Trump administration was ending the fiercely criticized surge of immigration agents to Minnesota. State and local officials greeted the announcement with cautious optimism as they celebrated Minnesota's challenging the conduct of federal agents. They were actually interfering. It's obstruction, and in some cases, harassment. Now, were Renee Good and Alex Pretty domestic terrorists? Probably not, but we have to scrutinize very closely what we see as these networks of anti-American, anti-federal law enforcement activities that amount to obstruction. Like I said, if you want to protest, I have no problem with you protest with your whistle and your megaphone, and you stand to the side with your signs, and you can yell and you can hold your sign. But as soon as you get in between law enforcement and their target, whether it's with a vehicle or personally, bad things can happen. I know. I've known people that have been killed after resisting arrest. I don't suggest you do it. Particularly if you're armed. If you're armed and you're resisting arrest, they're going to shoot you. And they shoot to kill. They don't play around like you might think that a firearm is for threatening people. If they pull their pistol, they might shoot you. All right, some not so good news from the Associated Press. Judge blocks Pentagon from pursuing Senator Mark Kelly for a call to resist unlawful orders. Federal judge agreed Thursday to block the Pentagon from punishing Democratic Senator Mark Kelly, a former Navy pilot and astronaut, from participating, in a video that called on troops to resist unlawful orders. And that's the wrinkle there. He said unlawful, but it obviously meant to intimidate service members or to call on leftist service members to resist Trump in things. And that's not, again, I hate to keep going back to the movie A Few Good Men, but there Tom Cruise asks, I think it was Kiefer Sutherland, do they have the right to decide what is a lawful order or what could be considered morally questionable? And Kiefer Sutherland's character says, no, they may not. And that's not up for the troops to decide whether something's lawful or not. If they feel into moral question, if they're about to kill somebody and they don't want to do it, well, they can be relieved. and maybe they could take legal action against the armed forces. But who knows what will happen with your case. In any case, the story goes on to say U.S. District Judge Richard Leon ruled that the Pentagon officials not only violated Kelly's First Amendment free speech rights, but they also threatened the constitutional liberties of millions of military retirees. The judge invoked an old-fashioned rebuke, horse feathers, in response to the government's claim that Kelly is trying to exempt himself from the rules of military justice. Here's the deal. Since he's a senator, he is an officer of the United States federal government, right? And he is a veteran. He's not a veteran on X telling service members that they should resist unlawful orders. That's protected. But if you're an officer of the U.S. government, and he's a politician, so he's an officer, and he was a former officer, Navy pilot, astronaut of the U.S. military, and which he still has, he's still considered part of the military. If you're a politician and you have former military service, you have to understand call-up orders and all these different things. That although you're sort of in reserve, even though you've left the military. In any case, that he is calling into question the legitimacy of the orders of the commander-in-chief. That's treasonous. Certainly traitorous. You can't do that. He's the commander-in-chief. They're supposed to follow a chain of command, and the commander-in-chief is at the top. And so if you're trying to, in any way, shape, or form, and this is just the stay, so this isn't really a ruling, is that if the commander-in-chief gives an order, then it's got to be followed. That's the way militaries work. You have at the very top the leader of the state, then the leader of the, in this country, we have a civilian leader of the armed forces, then the generals, then their subordinates, et cetera, et cetera. All right, moving on. The Washington Times, congressional Democrats alone in opposing ballot box integrity issues. This is story number 7. And what the story basically goes on to say is that their constituents don't support this. Their constituents support election integrity rules by the state, by the federal government, however they want to come about it. The Democrat Party is alone in opposing election integrity. I'll say it again. The Democratic Party, the politicians, Democrat politicians, are alone in opposing election integrity issues. So that's the thing. That's why Democrats are Democrats, because they know that it's not who votes and how many times, it's who counts the votes. And so that's why Democrats are Democrats, is because they like to game democracy, which is a procedure. And they know they can do that. So they're using all the tools in their toolbox, mail-in ballots, et cetera, messy voter rolls. And they know that the SAVE Act is going to undo all their schemes. Now, on the Republican side, there's a lot of consternation regarding the filibuster. Should we get rid of the filibuster so we could pass the SAVE Act? The problem is now is the redistricting, which is also a threat to Republican control. And the redistricting isn't going to be affected by the SAVE Act. So if you get rid of the filibuster and don't pass the SAVE Act, or even if you pass the SAVE Act and then Democrats still get control, then when they get control, there's going to be no way to stop them without the filibuster. National Review, not everyone should be made to vote. There's nothing wrong with preferring that not everybody vote in every election because voting is a responsibility that demands deliberation. Indeed, Republicans and conservatives believe that the voter registration system should be used to ensure that each vote is cast is eligible. Little snafu there. Republicans and conservatives believe that the voter registration system should be used to ensure that each vote is cast by an eligible voter in the right place and that no eligible voter votes more than once, while Democrats and progressives refuse to treat these as legitimate objectives in election integrity. Indeed, Democrats and progressives hide behind the simplest rhetorical position. Of course, everyone should vote, and if you suggest to them that not everyone should always vote, they immediately assume you mean that some people should be prevented or prohibited from voting. That's, of course, not what we mean at all. It's, as they say, it's deliberative. It takes some intellectual persistence and investigative nature to decide who to vote for. So you understand somebody's policy platform and you say yay or nay to all his items on that platform and how they compare with the opposing candidate. The way it works now is it's a tribal thing. It's the Democrats say you have to vote Democrat because that guy over there is a mean racist and he's going to come in a Klan hood and abduct your children and send them out of the country or send them to prison or do whatever. They create this specter and it's a false narrative. So that's how they get people to vote for Democrats, because they prey on simple-minded people who don't know what political policy is. So even somebody might be against immigration, illegal immigration. They might want illegal immigrants deported, but then they hear from the Democrats that ICE is going around rounding up innocent people and shooting them and torturing them and then sending them out of the country. Again, they prey on the simple-minded with false narrative because the people won't investigate themselves, investigate the issues themselves. They rely on hearsay, mostly from politicians, but other peers as well, influencers. Moving on, article number 9, Fox News. This crucial state is the last battleground in redistricting war between Trump and Democrats. New congressional maps could turn Virginia's 6-5 Republican edge into a 10-1 Democratic advantage ahead of the midterm elections. They're doing this all over the place. And so without the SAVE Act, we're going to lose. And even with the SAVE Act, there's some idea that we're not going to be able to be victorious. Story goes on to say Democratic state lawmakers in control of Virginia's legislature are fast-tracking a proposed new congressional map that would give the competitive state up to 4 more left-leaning U.S. House districts in the time for this year's midterm elections. The map, which Democratic Governor Abigail Spanberger, CIA, is expected to sign early next week, comes as Virginia voters are getting ready to vote this spring on a ballot measure that would give the legislature, rather than the current nonpartisan commission, redistricting power through the 2030 election. Republicans are calling the Democrats' redistricting effort unconstitutional power grab. I have always stated that I believe all states, I think this should be federal law, to be honest with you. It would have to be an amendment to the Constitution, that all states should use a nonpartisan commission to redistrict. And so, just like they did in California, that surprising referendum, people voted to kill the bipartisan or nonpartisan commission that redistricts in favor of allowing the supermajority to Well, what do you think the Democrats are going to do when they redistrict? Of course they are. And I think everything should be challenged in the Supreme Court, because what they do is they add little tails of, they slice out little districts of urban areas or areas with more African Americans or black communities that traditionally vote Democrat, and add them to traditionally Republican districts that may or may not be based on white voters. But that's my problem is the referendum in California should have been investigated. I'm sure there was fraud there. And it's happening in Virginia now also. Once you go left, there's no turning back, because they use this shit. So even if the state overwhelmingly wanted to kick out Democrats, it would be almost impossible. Just like in the state I'm in, it's a super majority. And the Republicans will never retake control. The Democrats make it that way. Next up, article number 10, story number 10 here from the Post Millennial. Illegal immigrant LA youth soccer coach charged with rape, murder of 13-year-old player could face death penalty. 13-year-old left his home to meet his soccer coach, never returned. According to court documents, 44-year-old Mario Algardo Garcia Aquino from El Salvador, who entered the United States illegally as a getaway, was a youth soccer coach in San Fernando Valley, including with the Hurricane Valley Boys Soccer Club. One of the frequent play fields was Whistlet Fields Park in North Hollywood, where he allegedly met 13-year-old Oscar Omar Hernandez on March 28th, 2025. Garcia Aquino was accused of sexually assaulting and murdering Hernandez at his home in Lancaster. The 13-year-old had left his home in Sun Valley to meet the coach, but never came back. His body was found dumped along a roadside in Ventura County. Garcia Aquino is also charged in multiple cases involving sexual abuse of minors, including allegedly assaulting a teenager at his home in December 2022, assaulting a 16-year-old boy in February 2024, and ongoing abuse of another minor between September 2022 and July 2023. This guy is scum. So, according to the murder's boy's brother, previously told the media that Garcia Aquino targeted families who lacked legal status in the U.S. So these criminal illegal aliens are taking advantage of families that are undocumented, because they usually don't want to go or resist going to the police, which they should have done. This guy had a long rap sheet. Why he wasn't taken off the street earlier is somebody who preys on innocence or is violent with police. Those people should be at the top of the apprehension list. Federalist, story number 11. Turns out the Irishman detained by ICE was facing drug charges back home. This is another false narrative spun by the Democrats. And this is from the Irish Daily Mail. Irishman held by ICE agents in U.S. faced drug charges before he left. And they mean before he left Ireland. Seamus Culleton, who arrived in America 17 years ago, is married to an American citizen, lives in Boston, has work authorization and pending green card application. Culleton came here legally in 2009 on a visa waiver program, but overstayed the 6-month limit. He's an illegal immigrant. Even though he's married, and now he's gained status to remain because he's married, surely he's not the kind of person Trump claimed to be targeting violent criminal aliens, the worst of the worst. After all, the media said Carlton had no criminal record, and he's made a decent life for himself here in America. But ICE arrested Carlton 5 months ago, and he's been in federal custody in Texas ever since. Good, because he was arrested on drug charges in Ireland, and he came to this country to flee his charges. So when they do checks of people that are here legally, either overstayed their visa or came over the border or are waiting for an asylum hearing, however you want to characterize it, that they find the guy's place of origin and they look for or request a search, a criminal search of him in his home country. Because a lot of these people, they flee, either are released from prison or they flee their country to evade criminal justice. So people that flee their country in an effort to evade criminal justice means that they're not welcome to stay here. So it doesn't matter how long you've been here. If you're here, if you came to this country because you're fleeing criminal prosecution in your own country, you're going to go back. That's not what asylum means. We get to choose who we want to come here. PJ Media, story number 12, ICE director says agency is tracking 800,000 criminals with deportation orders. Post-millennial, 1.6 illegal immigrants have final orders of removal. 800,000 are convicted criminals, according to ICE director Todd Lyons. What we're talking about, what we're tracking right now is about 1.6 million final orders in the United States, with final orders in the United States, with approximately 800,000 of those having criminal convictions. That's more than 14%. Sorry. Moving along, the Federalist. While Jimmy Lai sits in prison, Aline Gu takes the CCP's millions. So if you don't know, I'll just briefly, I don't want to read it again. Jimmy Lai was a media mogul in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong was a British protectorate. It's an island off the coast of communist China. So in a deal that the British made in the 90s with communist China, Hong Kong was to keep its autonomy until like 2045 or something ridiculous like that. Way into the future. I think it was 50 years, so it was 95. So it's 2045, I think. It was 50 years from 1995. So, but when COVID hit, the communist Chinese, rode into Hong Kong and took it over. They were already manipulating the politics there beforehand, but when COVID hit, they just rolled right in. In any case, so Jimmy Lai sits in prison in communist China because he was printing the truth. Eileen Gu is a Eileen Gu is a Olympic, I believe, skier, and she's an Olympian that is a United States citizen but is competing for communist China. Story goes on to say the troubling reality is that the U.S. legacy media has chosen to overlook Gu's ambiguity on her citizenship and shifting alliances. Even though Gu represents China, NBC has offered her ample and positive coverage, treating her as though she's part of the Team USA, and even inviting her on the Today Show with Samantha Guthrie. I don't think she's there right now. In any case, this week, Gu slammed President Trump for calling American skier Hunter Hess a loser after Haas expressed mixed emotions about representing the U.S. at the Winter Olympics. Yet she never criticized Chinese leader Xi. This silence is partly due to the unwillingness of corporate U.S. media outlets to challenge her on Chinese political matters. In past interviews, when pressed about human rights abuses and censorship in communist China, Gu has either evaded the question or echoed standard CCP narratives. She also, a little background on Gu. Gu was born in San Francisco and raised by her mother, an immigrant from China. Though she has birthright citizenship, Gu chose to represent China At both the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics and the 2026 Winter Olympics in Milan. Given that the Chinese government does not recognize dual citizenship, many have speculated that Gu must have renounced her U.S. citizenship to compete legally in the communist regime, or for the communist regime. However, Gu remains vague about her citizenship status. It is more likely that the Chinese government has allowed her to maintain her American citizenship while representing China because the CCP sees leading the media medal count in the Olympics as a powerful propaganda tool that reinforces its authority and effectiveness. Furthermore, Gu's good looks and international appeal enhance the propaganda value she provides to a regime that often faces criticism overseas, making her a key asset for Beijing on the global stage. Even having the privilege of meeting the Chinese leader Xi Jinping. She is an agent. As I said, you don't have to be a Chinese national if you're living in the United States. You don't have to be a Chinese national to spy for the Chinese, and you're required to do so there. You could be an American citizen and do it just the same. Next up. BJ Media, what the left doesn't get about immigration enforcement. What don't they get? That it's legitimate. And that what is illegitimate and caused the death of these two American citizens was the interference, impediment of ICE agents while they're trying to do their job. But the problem is they keep with this Mockingbird Media thing, this propaganda telling the American electorate that somehow what ICE is doing is illegitimate and what the protesters doing is constitutional. It isn't. Everybody has the right to protest. I'm not saying that. Redress of grievances, which I was going to have the word of the day. Originally, I wanted it to be senility. But it should be redress of grievances. When you redress grievances, it has nothing to do with putting yourself in between law enforcement and a suspect. Some honesty from the Hill. TPA USA halftime success channel gains 1 million subscribers after Kid Rock show. The channel now has 6.5 million subscribers. And apparently a lot of that million, a lot of a big portion of those million subs happened after the program. Wasn't during. They had over 1 million viewers, but apparently a lot of those subscribers subscribed after the show was over. So not so good news. I've often said that although I support President Trump because I always support the candidate which has the best plan, it's policy, not personality. So I vote on the issues. Trump is not a conservative. Trump likes to spend money. We really need more of a fiscal hawk. And that brings us to our next headline here, story number 17. The nation's fiscal clouds get even darker. First, the basic statistics of the impending debt disaster. Federal spending is set to increase from 23.1% of GDP in 2025 to 24.4% of a decade from now, outpacing growth in revenue. That will cause the annual deficit to grow from 5.8% of GDP to 6.7% in the same period. Most horrifying, the national debt held by the public will rise from 99.4% of the nation's annual output to 120.2%, and you can bet that will only go up from there. Yeah, and it goes on to say there's more. The CBO now projects that the average interest rate on the debt will exceed the rate of nominal GDP growth beginning in 2031, meaning that existing debt will rise faster than the U.S. economy before the federal government borrows anything more to cover the new spending. Primary driver of the debt is not too low revenue, as progressives like to insist. They want to tax more. Receipts from the federal income tax are actually expected to rise as a share of GDP. Well, they always do. And overall revenue is projected to be higher percentage of GDP than the historical average from 2026 to 2036. The biggest problem for the deficit are on the spending side. Everybody knows this. That's the damage to the economy is from spending. We found this out during the Joe Biden presidency. So if you still think that Joe Biden is better than Donald Trump, you got to get your head out of your ass. Or get his head out of his own ass, or his head out of your ass, or whatever. Joe Biden was not a good president. He ruined the country. And the ruination is part of a larger scheme. And the larger scheme is to do away with individual liberties. Because you can't have a socialist authoritarian world government and people still have the right to free speech and firearms, et cetera, et cetera. To resist search and seizure in your person and in your belongings and personal and effects, et cetera, et cetera. Which is different. A search warrant is different than an arrest warrant. So I know people get confused about that with ICE. When they talk about warrants, administrative versus judicial, an arrest warrant is an arrest warrant, not a search warrant, which is completely different. Washington Times, 2 teens charged with attempted murder for allegedly plotting mass shooting at Indiana high school. They're girls this time. Shelbyville, Indiana, Alexis Pickett, a student from Morristown High School in Shelbyville, Indiana, and Melanie Little of Corinth, Mississippi, both 17, are charged as adults in alleged crime planned over social media involving Pickett sending video of the school's layout, according to law enforcement documents. The investigation began in December when Pickett's mother, Rhonda Nicholson, approached sheriff's police with concerns that Pickett showed behaviors indicating that she intended to harm herself or others, including online conversations obsessing with past school shooters. It's a good thing that parents are involved. Parents are the first line of defense in child psychology, psychiatry, etc. Even the Shelby County prosecutor Brad Landwerlin, the mother saved a bunch of lives. What I have to say as parents is it's okay to check your child's activities. Why there were, they don't seem to have any motive. I read through the article. There doesn't seem to be a motive here. That's most concerning. First things first, were these children on antidepressants? More than likely they were. We might never find out. It said she had a muzzle loader firearm, but also she said she had hit. Oh, it showed little photos of targets. She said she had hit using a shotgun and a .357 revolver. The two discussed without resolution how to obtain other guns. That really doesn't mean anything. She had a muzzle loader. She wasn't really a threat. But this, obviously, police thought this concern was real. Whether they're going to get 20 to 40 years in prison, they didn't really have guns yet, but it seemed like they were planning an attack. Like I said, you'd need to find out what the motive was, what got young people to throw their lives away in a school shooting. It's suicide, either by their own hand or by law enforcement. Why is this? Federalist has another article. Gen Z is dumber thanks to adults saturating their lives with screens. It's not the kids themselves. For all the noise surrounding Gen Z's cognitive disorder, more honest question is not whether young Americans are capable of deep thought, but why they would be motivated to pursue it in the first place. In other words, they've given up on intellectual pursuits. Neuroscientist Jared Cooney Horvath, who did, in fact, present troubling evidence to Congress. Despite this, the article's compresses that testimony into a caricature, reducing a complex structural argument into an insult lobbed at an entire generation of young people. I agree with this. Horvath's written statement is a warning that evolving technology and cultural attitudes contribute to the state of today's youth educational development. It's true. Why do you need to learn something if you can just look it up? So you can speak. So you can speak without referring to your phone. And they can. They don't have good communication skills. Anyway, it's one of the reasons I started this podcast was so I could speak or practice speaking extemporaneously while recalling ideas, thoughts, statistics in my head. Anyway, over the past 2 decades, Horvath writes, the cognitive development of children across much of the developed world has stalled and in many domains reversed. That reversal is historically unprecedented. For over a century, expanding access to education reliably produced cognitive gains of children over their parents until the mid-2000s. That's why you know it's a scheme. They tested this, they knew that it would lower development, and of course it did. The same thing with putting certain chemicals in the foods, vaccines, lead, fluoride, list goes on. Blaming Generation Z is of little interest to Horvath. Instead, he points to the education system. The most significant change, he argues, is the rapid and largely unregulated expansion of educational technology, learning from screens and computers. When it should be done in a social setting, because the social aspect of human behavior should be used to educate people, not putting them in front of screens. They find that the screen represents the prehistoric fire, and looking at it is very meditative, but it doesn't produce a stimulative effect cognitively. More from the Federalist. Here are 10 great Justice Scalia quotes to mark a decade since his passing. I only picked a few. Persuade your fellow citizens it's a good idea and pass a law. That's what democracy is all about. Indeed. Not about 9 superannuated judges who have been there too long. That's about the court. I say this all the time. They always say, oh, democracy is about voting. It's not. It's really the democratic part of our government. The most democratic part of our government is our representatives voting on legislation. It's not electing your people. Although I think that's important too, but I think it's less important than how your representatives vote. Because that's what they do. They elect the guy because they like him or whatever, but they never look at your representative's voting record. Who out there has looked up your representative's voting record? Anyone? Nobody does it. They don't know. When I first started doing it, I was surprised, aghast at how I thought my representatives and senators voted and how they actually voted. Another quote from Scalia, undoubtedly, some think that the Second Amendment is outmoded in a society where our standing army is the pride of our nation, where well-trained police forces provide personal security, and where gun violence is a serious problem. That is perhaps debatable. But what is not debatable is that it is not the role of this court to pronounce the Second Amendment extinct. Indeed. And we're going to get into why that is in just a second in another quote from Scalia. My favorite of all time, Supreme Court Justice, I think the smartest of all, the way he ruled and the way he outlined his dissent, etc. And I think he was murdered. You could look into it if you want. And the reason he was murdered is he was so good at what he did. The Constitution is not dead. The Constitution is a living document. It isn't a living document. It's dead. Dead, 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 Scalia said. No, I don't say that. I call it the enduring Constitution. That's what I tell them. In other words, referring to originalist doctrine versus progressive doctrine, which means, oh, the Constitution in today, forget of what they meant back then. That was a long time ago. What does the Constitution mean now versus ruling as an originalist would on what the founders meant at the time? It's not a living document, and it's he said it's dead. It's not really dead. It's enduring, but it's not dead. It's enduring what the founders meant by it. And the reasoning was to ensure liberty for individuals, individual persons. If you get the joke there. Anyway, moving on. Just the news, California man charged over imposter ransom demand in Nancy Guthrie's case makes court appearance. Derek Colella, 42, of Hawthorne, California, was charged by the Justice Department with transmitting a demand for ransom in interstate commerce and without disclosing his identity, utilizing a telecommunications device with intent to abuse, threaten, or harass a person. Colella allegedly sent the demands via 2 text messages to the Guthries family on February 4th, her oldest daughter, Annie, and her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. And he allegedly made a 9-second phone call to a family member. Court's records show that Colella allegedly used a VoIP phone line to send a message reading, it couldn't be traced. Did you get that Bitcoin? We're waiting on our end for the transaction. Good. I think all the ransom requests were false, which means they didn't have anything to do with the kidnapping. I have my own theories on the kidnapping. It's a disappearance. We don't even know if she's still alive. There was her blood on the scene, which to me indicates that she might not be alive. And I don't think any of the ransom requests are connected to these kidnappers. I don't think the kidnapping was done for ransom, because usually when you have a kidnapping within a day or two of the disappearance, the ransom is requested. Usually right to the family. This only broke, and they only sent the ransom after it became a big news story. More on Epstein. The Telegraph. Story number 22, I witnessed Epstein's post-mortem. His death must be reinvestigated. This is an interview with Dr. Michael Baden, who was famous for his testimony in the O.J. Simpson trial. And he was hired by the brother who said that his colloidal, hyoidal bone was broken. And the only way he could do that is not from hanging, it's from strangulation. They're not one and the same. The way you die in a hanging is you break your neck. You don't strangle yourself to death. Sometimes you do. If your neck doesn't break, you can strangle yourself to death. That's why they used hanging. It's supposed to break your neck, then you die immediately. But if you don't, you strangle. But that's not, Dr. Baden said that that's not possible from a sheet, the way he hung himself. It was not possible. But he was hired by the brother, and I seem to think that this is also a ploy to create ambiguity. Oh, he was murdered. No, he wasn't murdered. He committed suicide. Maybe none of those are true. Maybe Baden's testimony and the other testimony of the corrections facility, maybe they're both wrong, and maybe he was taken out of there alive, and now he's living in Paraguay or Uruguay or something. I bet you that's the case. I think this has happened before, by the way. Washington Times, Mercedes-Benz recalls nearly 12,000 EQB electric SUVs over battery fire risk. If you didn't know, you don't want an electric car because they're heavier. There's more use on the tire. And of course, you have battery fire risk. And most of those battery fires cannot be extinguished. Independent, Switzerland to vote on capping its population at 10 million. Proponents claim the goal is to protect the environment, natural resources, infrastructure, and the social safety net, all of which is true. But they also say proponents of the initiative led by the anti-immigration Swiss People's Party that has the most seats in parliament. They do. Why would that? I thought everybody loves immigration in Europe. Have tallied enough petition signatures to put the issue on a national ballot. It's a referendum. On the 14th of June, the government announced Wednesday. Good for them. Good for the Swiss. Very smart. It's the cost. It's always the cost. In many ways, the cost of illegal immigration is great. Washington Post, I went into a phone-free silence. Something disturbing happened. This story number 25. It felt unnatural not to be scrolling while waiting for a session to begin. I never have this problem. I was blindsided by the kaleidoscope of emotions that poured out in the silence. In the absence of distractions from the phone, my thoughts bombarded me in random ways. I felt variously bored and anxious, clear-eyed and confused. One moment I felt myself floating blissfully above the snow-covered hills, until I was awakened by my own snore. At another point in meditation, while I concentrated on my deep breathing, sadness suddenly overcame me. My brain transported me back 18 years to my mother's deathbed and her breathing weak and sporadic. Your mind is a great thing. Don't, and this is what happened a lot to young people, don't supplant your mind with your phone. It happens to me too. You're sitting there and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I want the phone to, and you don't even know why you pick it up. A little toy. So I try not to do that. I try to resist doing that at all costs. I don't really go on social media. A lot of times I'll put my phone away. But I use it mostly for news. I don't do social media. I get my news straight from the source. In any case, some people experience an adrenaline crash as their stressed minds and bodies adjust to the calm, but it also turns out that suddenly shutting off external stimuli and turning attention inward can demand a startling amount of energy indeed. It's easy. The phone is easy. We are often so externally focused that we don't recognize what is going on in our minds. And when we begin to pay attention to that, it's generally exhausting for most people. The understanding the mind, your mind, and mental illness that might go along with that, understanding yourself and understanding the calm silence and being able to function devoid of stimuli is key to learn, and it's not easy. It's easier to be distracted. That's why people do it. We've covered this before. Wall Street Journal, the mega rich are turning their mansions into impenetrable forces. Anxiety over high-profile violence has the wealthy spending big on armed security, bunkers, and even moats to keep themselves safe from intruders. You know that's not what it is. It's what's coming. It's not what's happening, but what's coming. National Review against the AI doomerism consensus, which I covered this yesterday, that things are going to change remarkably in the next 6 months to a year, and you won't understand it. But in any case, this guy, Noah Rothman, who writes for the National Review, says in his thought-provoking piece on the societal risk posed by artificial intelligence, Phil Klein jumped off the mega viral essay published on social media this week by AI entrepreneur and investor Matt Schumer, which I covered yesterday. I went over it in depth. In it, Schumer contributes to the emerging consensus that thinking machines will, not could, give way to catastrophic economic disruption and displacement. Human endeavor, jobs, and also hobbies. Whatever you want to do. You want to draw a picture, whatever, AI will do it faster. You might just talk about, hey, I'm going to draw a picture, and then AI is going to do it for you and then print it out even before you pick up a pen. And it'll mock you and say, ha ha, I did it. So it's going to make people feel worth less, which is, it's like when you're unemployed, a lot of times that makes you feel like you don't have any worth. That's going to happen on a grand scale coming up with the technological revolution, which we're in right now, and we're distracted with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance and Lex Wexner. Again, with the National Review, will the AI revolution foment a revolution? It will. It will cause disruption that may be felt hardest by certain professions, but it will gradually be integrated into our lives as a tool to make us more productive and better at our jobs. It will free up time for leisure. No, it won't. That old Jetsons thing, they were saying this in the 50s. It was the excuse for technological development was always, well, you'll be able to sit around and read books and stuff and everything will be done for you. However, it doesn't work. That doesn't work at all. What happens is you don't make any income because that's what you get paid to complete tasks. You don't make any income, and so there's not going to be any leisure time. You're going to be sitting on a beach reading a book unless you have stored money away. And in the event of an economic collapse, that's not going to help you anyway. So the upheaval is coming. How we're going to survive it is another thing entirely. You're not going to be able to, just be like, oh, I'm going to go to the beach and read a book because you won't have food to eat. You won't be able to pay your electrical bill, your phone bill. You won't be able to survive unless you got millions stored away. So for me, I'm right at the cusp there where I might be able to make it before we perish. It's the young people I worry about. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. Join me every day, live stream, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. on Rumble, YouTube X. I had a problem lately with X, so I don't know if I'm streaming there yet. It would be nice to know if I did. I'll have to double check. But thanks for joining me today. You can also join me on social media, Getter Minds, Facebook, Substack, Truth Social. Thanks again for joining me today. Have a great weekend. Happy Friday. I'll see you next week. Respect. Respect.
Conspiracy. Don't you know that it's a conspiracy?
The New World Order.
Less than 3% of you people read books.